name is Ethan Price, and I'm 32 years old. This story happened in Florida, at the Withlacoochee State Forest not too long ago. I still can't believe I'm here to tell it. Every time I close my eyes, I can feel that place closing in on me all over again. I never thought I'd encounter something truly supernatural, something beyond what I could rationally explain. But here I am, grappling with memories that still make me bolt awake at night, drenched in sweat. I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks, ever since my friend Marcus Reed proposed it. Marcus is the same age as me, early 30s, a guy I've known since college. He's always been the adventurous one, talking big about exploring off-the-beaten-path locations. He loves testing limits, both physically and mentally. Marcus is the kind of person who laughs at ghost stories and tries to outdo any scary tale with his own flamboyant renditions. Yet somehow, after everything we went through, I don't think he'll ever be quite the same. We traveled in an RV, intending to camp deep in Withlacoochee State Forest, near a remote clearing far from the usual tourist camps. Marcus insisted this was the best way to truly experience nature. Joining us on the trip were 3 other friends: Danielle Larson, Danny, we call her James, Jay Thompson, and Camilla Lopez. Danny is 29, a bookworm to the core. She's got a fascination with folklore and a knack for diving into obscure historical details. If it weren't for her background knowledge, I don't think any of us would have made sense of the hell we stumbled into. Jay Thompson, also late 20s, is a quiet guy who loves photography. He's always sneaking off to get the perfect shot of wildlife or landscapes. And Camilla, she's 30 as well. Strong-willed and fearless, she's the one who usually keeps a level head when the rest of us get spooked. She might poke fun at superstition, but she's fiercely protective if she thinks her friends are in danger. It was a mild Florida afternoon when we all piled into the RV. I remember the drive felt serene at first, with Spanish moss dangling from oak trees, the sunlight peeking through the branches in golden streams. Marcus drove most of the way, confident and chatty, going on about the adrenaline rush we'd get from camping in a forest rumored to have old tribal sites. The rest of us were in the back joking about ghost stories, rummaging through the gear we'd packed. Flashlights, camping supplies, extra ropes, a first aid kit, and enough snacks to feed us for days. Jay sat near the window, camera in hand, photographing every bend in the road. Danny was flipping through a local Florida folklore book. She read aloud a paragraph about rumored witch sightings in Withlacoochee, sprinkling in the fact that the land might have belonged to multiple tribes centuries ago. Camilla snickered, claiming it was just an overhyped tourist rumor. I wish I could say I felt only excitement, but for some reason a knot formed in my stomach as we finally left the main highway. The road narrowed, asphalt turned to gravel. A thick canopy of pines and cypress enveloped us. You could see the daylight dim as we ventured deeper into the forest. The temperature dropped a few degrees, or at least it felt that way. I brushed off my unease as typical nerves that come with venturing somewhere remote. We reached our campsite by late afternoon. It was a small clearing ringed by towering pines, branches swaying in a slow dance overhead. Marcus expertly maneuvered the RV into position, and Jay hopped out to survey the area for a good photo vantage. I helped Camilla unload supplies, while Danny wandered off a short distance, curiosity piqued by what she thought were carvings on tree trunks. "It's definitely some kind of symbol," Danny called back as she pushed aside a dangling curtain of Spanish moss. "Might be Seminole or Timucua. I'd have to look it up." She traced a shape on the bark, some spiral design with a slash through the middle. "Probably just kids messing around," Camilla said dismissively. She was unrolling a tent that a couple of us planned to use as overflow sleeping space. You get a lot of bored teenagers leaving weird carvings. Don't read too much into it. Danny just shrugged. "You never know." We set up everything in about an hour. The RV was parked at the center with a small tent pitched a few yards away. We cleared a fire pit and ringed it with stones. It started to feel like a normal fun camping trip, especially when Marcus cracked open a couple of beers and turned on some music from a portable speaker. The forest around us was so still that our small circle of conversation and laughter seemed to vibrate through the quiet, We grilled dinner over the fire, telling each other the usual jokes and stories. Even Jay, typically reserved, joined in. The tension in my stomach lessened, replaced by a pleasant fullness from good food and better company. Night fell fast. One moment the sky was streaked with pink and purple, and the next darkness settled in. The crickets and frogs started up, their rhythmic calls weaving a comforting background track. I remember watching the flames dance in our fire pit, the orange glow flickering across Marcus's face. That was when Danny decided to share her local lore knowledge. "So, has anyone heard about the Witch of Withlacoochee?" she said, leaning forward. The flames illuminated her expression, which was half excitement, half anxiety. Some say it's a spirit, others say it's an actual woman who used to live deep in the forest centuries ago, practicing dark magic. People claim they see a tall figure, sometimes shapeless, especially on nights with no moon. Marcus responded with a playful smirk. "You gotta do better than that to spook me," Danny pressed on. "They say if you see her or feel her presence, it means you've crossed into sacred territory. And that's just one story. Others talk about an older legend, a shape-shifting guardian. It punishes trespassers who disturb ancient burial grounds." Sure, Camilla teased, rolling her eyes. "Next, you'll say Bigfoot's out here too, right?" I can still recall the uneasy feeling I got as Danny's words lingered. But I joined the others in laughing it off. We had no reason to believe such tales. The mood remained light for the time being. Eventually, we tossed more wood on the fire and settled in for the night. One strong gust of wind kicked up out of nowhere, briefly snuffing the flames, causing the rest of us to jump. Marcus and Jay relit them and we laughed, chalking it up to a freak breeze. But deep down, that small incident set the tone for what was to come. I crawled into my sleeping bag in the RV. Outside, I could hear Camilla zipping up the tent and the others chattering about the next day's hike. It was the last moment of normalcy before everything took a turn. Sometime around midnight, I woke up to absolute silence. No crickets, no rustle of wind. It was as though the forest held its breath. Then I heard it, whispering. I couldn't make out words or even if it was one voice or many. At first, I thought maybe Marcus or Camilla was talking in their sleep. But it felt outside, not inside the RV. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the sound. My heart fluttered uncomfortably. When I tried to look out the small window, the whispering vanished, replaced by that suffocating quiet again. I told myself to calm down, that it was just the wind or my imagination. Eventually, I drifted back to an uneasy sleep. Morning found all of us up early, except Marcus, who slept in. Jay was outside with his camera, snapping shots of the dew-drenched foliage. Danny was hunched over the remains of the fire, studying something. I walked over, noticing a large footprint in the soft dirt near the edges of the campsite. It was human-like but elongated, with 4 distinct toes and a weird shape to the heel. "Could just be some messed-up boot print," I offered, though I wasn't convinced. "It leads off that way," Danny said, pointing to a trail of similar prints vanishing into the undergrowth. "I'm telling you, this is weird." Camilla joined us, biting her lip. She was typically the biggest skeptic, but even she looked unsettled. "It's probably a hunter or a homeless person living off-grid," she muttered, though her tone lacked conviction. When Marcus finally rolled out of the RV, we showed him the prints. He made light of it, suggesting we mark the trail with bright tape and call it the new Florida Bigfoot. Jay was more serious, urging maybe we move our campsite closer to civilization. He said he'd heard some odd noises during the night, but assumed they were animals. As the conversation became more heated, Danny and Jay wanting to relocate, Marcus scoffing at the idea of running away, Camilla stood firmly by Marcus, claiming we were all jumping at shadows. I found myself trying to mediate, not wanting to escalate. That's how we left it, deciding we'd stay at least one more night, yet an undercurrent of unease pulsed among us. We spent the day exploring. The forest was actually beautiful, with sunbeams piercing the canopy, illuminating the mossy ground. We stumbled across a small creek, took photos, and joked around. For a while, it almost felt like the tensions of the morning had faded. But I noticed Jay kept glancing at the shadows between the trees, as if he expected something to step out at any moment. It was a look I'd never seen on him before. By late afternoon, Jay decided to head off on his own to capture some shots along a side trail he'd noticed earlier. He said the light was perfect for photography. He assured us he'd be back before dark. We parted ways, expecting to regroup at camp for dinner. As dusk fell, I started to get antsy. Jay had been gone longer than he'd promised. When the sky took on that deep purple hue, I mentioned my concern to Marcus, who shrugged, saying Jay was probably just losing track of time. But the tension in my gut returned stronger than ever. When darkness fully settled, we agreed to search for Jay. Grabbing flashlights and calling his name into the silent forest, we followed the path he'd mentioned. About a mile in, our beams caught the reflection of a lens on the ground. Jay's camera, lying face down, the lens cracked. I stooped to pick it up, my hand trembling. There was no sign of Jay, though. Footprints circled frantically in the muddy earth as if he had been spinning around looking for something. Danny gasped when she spotted what looked like scattered personal items. A small notebook Jay always kept, a lens cap, and a half-crumpled snack wrapper. The footprints led deeper into the dark. We called out to him until our voices were hoarse, hearing no reply except our echoes. In the beam of my flashlight, I noticed strange bundles of sticks tied together with Spanish moss, hanging from branches, forming some sort of eerie ornament. Danny approached them cautiously. I could feel the hair on my arms standing on end. It was as though someone, or something, had deliberately placed them there. Eventually, with no trail left to follow and fear spiking, we returned to the campsite. I felt helpless, angry at myself for letting Jay wander alone. The question in my mind was, who or what took him? Back at camp, the atmosphere was stifling. We started a fire but couldn't keep it going. Well, the wind kept gusting. It was eerily similar to the night before, except the sense of foreboding was thick enough to taste. Around 9 or 10 at night, just as we tried to decide if we should attempt searching again or wait until morning, a faint chanting broke the stillness, low, rhythmic, almost like a lullaby in a language none of us recognized. It echoed off the trees, growing louder, then fading, only to resurface from another direction. Camilla cursed under her breath. Marcus, armed with a flashlight, tried to pinpoint the source but came up empty. Danny whispered something about old ceremonies. My heart hammered so hard I felt sure everyone could hear it. That was when we heard the scratching on the side of the RV. A slow, methodical scrape, like someone dragging a sharp stick across metal. Marcus swung his flashlight around, yelling at whoever was out there. The beam caught a shape at the edge of the clearing, a silhouette too tall, too thin, legs bent at an odd angle, arms elongated. Its eyes caught the light and flashed with an inhuman brightness. Before any of us could react, the shape dropped to all fours and skittered into the darkness with unnatural speed. A wave of raw dread coursed through me, a primal response. I think all of us were shaking, words momentarily lost. We huddled in the RV for what felt like hours, listening to the wind moan and the intermittent chanting that rose and fell. No one slept. When dawn finally broke, we realized we had no workable plan. Jay was missing, and we feared he might be in mortal danger. Marcus wanted to trek out to find help or phone reception, but the forest was vast, and if that creature was still lurking, it might track him down easily. In the end, we decided to try starting the RV and driving until we reached a ranger station or at least a main road. That idea crumbled when we realized the RV engine wouldn't turn over. Marcus cursed, pounding the dashboard, but it was dead. We'd checked it thoroughly the day before, and it had been in perfect condition. Tensions erupted at that point. Danny tried to reason that we were dealing with something supernatural, a spirit or shapeshifter. Camilla refused to accept that, shouting about how we needed to keep calm, that a mechanical issue plus a missing friend didn't automatically mean ghost. Marcus, fueled by frustration, told Danny to stop with the legends. I tried to stand between them, Feeling a mixture of terror and responsibility, I didn't want the group to fracture. We needed each other if we had any hope of making it out of there. It was late afternoon when we finally decided if Jay hadn't returned by sunset, we'd attempt a hike out in the morning. We had flashlights, some flares, enough water, but with night fast approaching, we worried we might get lost or ambushed by that thing again. Just as the sun dipped, we saw someone or something emerge into the clearing. It looked like Jay staggering forward. I almost cried, out in relief. Danny and Camilla rushed over, shining flashlights in his face. Their expressions changed, in an instant from relief to horror. Jay's eyes were milky white, unfocused. His clothes were torn and dirty, and he mumbled incoherently in a guttural tone, not English or Spanish or anything else we recognized. It was as if he was possessed. He let out a shrill wail that sent chills down my spine. Then, without warning, he twisted his body at an odd angle and sprinted away, deeper into the woods, faster than any normal person could. We followed for a few yards, calling after him, but he vanished into the thick trees. Now we were all convinced something beyond our understanding was toying with us. Jay's appearance, if that was truly Jay, confirmed that the legends Danny had mentioned might be real. We regrouped, a grim determination uniting us. Danny scoured Jay's broken camera and notebook for clues while Marcus tried once again to fix the RV engine, cursing under his breath. Camilla kept watch. I helped Danny interpret some of the half-written notes Jay had scribbled. There were sketches of a faceless figure, repeated over and over. One scrawl read, "Guardian, punish, shadows." Another page featured a spiral shape with a slash through it, exactly like the carvings Danny had spotted on the trees. Danny flipped through her own folklore references and concluded we were dealing with a shape-shifting spirit or a vengeful witch guardian of the forest. Some variants of the legend indicated it protected sacred ground, punishing trespassers with illusions and even stealing their faces or spirits. It could mimic the voices or forms of people it captured. If that was the case, Jay might be trapped under some curse, if not worse. That night, we heard more chanting than ever. It came from every direction, an oppressive chorus that made my ears ache. The wind picked up, swirling leaves and dust around our small circle. That was when the entity, if it was one being, began to manifest. Right at the edge of firelight, we saw a gaunt figure. It was tall, wearing what looked like a distorted face, stretched too tight across its skull. It seemed to flicker, one moment appearing in the form of a thin woman, the next moment like some monstrous fusion of human and beast. Its eyes glowed in that horrible, reflective way. Marcus, always the bold one, grabbed a heavy stick and lit the end on fire, brandishing it like a torch. "Stay back!" he yelled. The entity emitted a guttural hiss that reverberated across the clearing. Without warning, it lunged, batting Marcus aside with a strength no normal person could have. He flew back, colliding with the side of the RV. The impact made a sickening thud, and he dropped to the ground limp. "Marcus!" Camilla screamed, rushing over to him. He was alive but badly hurt. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead. His breathing was shallow. Danny and I scrambled to help while the entity melted back into the darkness, chanting, intensifying all around us. It felt like dozens of voices were circling, mocking, ready to close in at any second. We were in a nightmare, powerless against something we could barely comprehend. Marcus groaned, eyes half open, in too much pain to stand. We got him into the RV, laid him out on the makeshift couch. Our first aid kit had bandages and painkillers, but that wouldn't help, if he had internal injuries. Camilla was on the verge of panic, tears streaming down her face as she pressed gauze to the wound. Danny and I faced each other, unsure of our next move. Should we try to make a run for help, carrying Marcus? The forest was too vast and that creature was out there. Our best shot, Danny insisted, was to use some sort of counter-ritual or cleansing. She flipped frantically through her references and Jay's notes, searching for any mention of driving out or appeasing a guardian spirit. We found partial instructions, but they were incomplete. Something about forming a protective circle, using salt and fire, reciting certain lines that were half distorted in Jay's scribbles. It felt desperate and ridiculous, but we had nothing else to cling to. So we gathered supplies, table salt from our food bin, bits of charcoal from the fire pit, some old candles. Camilla stayed with Marcus in the RV while we prepped. Outside, the forest was pitch black, trees swaying as though possessed themselves. Every nerve in my body was on high alert. We formed a circle near the dying fire pit, sprinkling salt, drawing shapes based on the fragments we'd read. Danny tried to chant, voice quavering. I held a lit torch, scanning the perimeter for that entity. In a sudden swirl of wind, the chanting from the forest went silent, replaced by a deep hush that pressed on my eardrums. Then it appeared again, stepping out from behind a gnarled pine. Its face was contorted. It had Jay's features for a split second. Then they rippled into the monstrous visage. My stomach lurched. I wanted to bolt, but Danny's voice held me in place. She continued chanting, stumbling over pronunciations. I jammed the torch into the ground at the edge of the circle, hoping we had done enough. The creature hissed, its limbs bending at impossible angles. It circled us, pacing just outside the salt line. When Danny's voice rose in a final phrase, it lunged, stopping short as if hitting an invisible barrier. I nearly dropped to my knees in shock and relief. But the barrier was weak. You could feel the energy pulsing, threatening to give out. It battered the air with those spindly arms, let out a piercing shriek, then retreated just beyond the flicker of the torchlight. For a moment, we thought we'd succeeded in keeping it at bay. All at once, the wind exploded, scattering salt and embers, blowing out the torch. Darkness engulfed us. I heard Danny scream my name. We fumbled for our flashlights, hearts pounding. By the time we regained light, the creature was gone. Silence again, as thick as the black around us, but it carried a menacing weight. We rushed back to the RV. Marcus was conscious, groggy, but able to open his eyes and mumble. Camilla was doing her best to calm him, pressing a cold compress to his forehead. We were exhausted, terrified, half sure we'd all be dead before morning. Yet the hours crawled by without another direct attack. Perhaps the partial ritual had forced it to retreat, or maybe it was just toying with us. At dawn, we stumbled out of the RV, battered in spirit. The forest felt ominously calm, as if the events of the night were a feverish dream. We knew we couldn't stay. Marcus was in rough shape. Jay was missing, likely lost to something none of us could fully comprehend. Camilla and Danny helped Marcus walk while I carried what supplies I could manage. We aimed for the nearest marked trail we knew of, hoping it would lead us to a ranger station or at least an area with cell reception. We walked in tense silence for an hour, nerves on edge, scanning every cluster of trees for movement. At one point, we saw a deer bolt across our path, and we all nearly jumped out of our skins. On and on we trudged, adrenaline and fear fueling each step. Finally, the forest thinned, and we heard the distant hum of a highway. We emerged onto a gravel service road, saw a ranger's truck parked a ways off. Relief crashed over us like a wave. The ranger, a stocky, middle-aged man, took one look at Marcus's injuries and signaled for help. As we recounted our story, minus the supernatural details, he gave us the typical, once over that said, "You folks have been out here too long." I doubt he believed any of the surreal parts, but he didn't question that something awful had transpired. They took us to a nearby hospital. Marcus was rushed in for scans. He had a concussion, some internal bruising, but nothing life-threatening, which felt like a small miracle. Danny and Camilla stuck together, looking hollowed out by the ordeal. I kept waiting for Jay to walk through the doors, battered but alive. But he never did. Days passed. Search parties combed the area, found no trace of him except for that broken camera and footprints that led nowhere. Officially, Jay Thompson is a missing person, presumed lost in the wilderness. But we know the truth is far more terrifying. I've tried to rationalize it 100 different ways. Maybe a cult was living in the forest, or maybe we fell victim to elaborate trickery. Yet those footprints, those glowing eyes, the impossible speed, Jay's possessed appearance, none of it fits into a neat, logical explanation. Sometimes I dream about the chanting, that unearthly harmony drifting through the pines, about the shapeless figure appearing at the edge of the clearing. I'll wake up with my heart pounding like it's trying to break free from my ribs. A few weeks after the incident, Danny called me late at night, her voice trembling. She'd been revisiting the folklore, discovering more references to ancient spirits said to guard certain swaths of Florida wilderness. She kept talking about how the land itself might reject intruders who disturb hallowed ground. She wondered if we'd parked on one of those old ceremonial sites, unknowingly stepping onto cursed land. She said the incomplete ritual might have only enraged the thing. I told her I didn't want to hear it anymore, I just needed to move on. But the truth is I can't. The question gnaws at me. Did we truly escape, or did it simply let us go? I think about Jay. At night, in my dreams, I still see his figure, stumbling toward us, eyes white and vacant. And I see that creature wearing Jay's face as a twisted mockery. I wonder if out there in the dense woods of Withlacoochee, that spirit still roams, wearing new faces, carving new symbols, waiting for the next unsuspecting group of campers. The authorities treat it as a normal missing person case. There's always that chance he got lost or succumbed to the elements. But we know better. Something ancient and malevolent walks among those trees. Marcus recovered physically, but he doesn't talk about the trip. He put his house up for sale within months and moved to an apartment in the city, as if concrete and crowds might shield him from nightmares. Camilla hasn't gone on any camping trips since. She used to be fearless, but now, she's the first to say no whenever the idea of an overnight hike comes up. As for Danny, she devours more books about local legends, as if searching for a key to unravel the mystery or free Jay from whatever fate befell him. Sometimes I think she'd go back out there if she had the chance, searching for answers. I just pray she doesn't. I can't handle losing another friend to the cursed shadows of that forest. In the quiet of early morning, sometimes I jolt awake, certain I can hear that haunting chant drifting on the breeze. Part of me wants to believe it's only my imagination, yet part of me fears that once you've seen that entity, it never really leaves you. It's like it leaves a mark on your soul, a lingering darkness that you carry wherever you go. I don't have the answers. What I do know is real enough. We went out there 5 friends in an RV, thinking it would be a fun weekend in nature, and we came back 4, with our minds permanently branded by horrors we can't unsee. People keep telling me to move on, but how do you move on when you've witnessed the impossible? When you've faced something that not only defies explanation but also seems fueled by a malevolence as old as the land itself? All I can do is share this story, even if it sounds unbelievable. Maybe it'll warn others to stay away from those hidden nooks of Withlacoochee, to respect the land and whatever dark forces might roam it. I feel a pang of guilt whenever I think of Jay, still out there somewhere, maybe alive in some twisted, unnatural way. Or maybe his face was just stolen by that shape-shifting monster. Sometimes I stand by my window at home, listening to the rustle of wind through suburban trees, and my mind conjures the image of that gaunt figure, peering at me from just beyond the streetlights, waiting. I still dream about returning, about finishing whatever ritual we tried to start, about forcing the entity to release Jay. But whenever that notion crosses my mind, I'm reminded of the powerlessness I felt that night, the unstoppable force that battered us like rag dolls, the cold emptiness behind those gleaming eyes. We were lucky to escape with our lives at all. Pushing my luck further might not be wise, so I let the nightmares come and I endure them. They are the price I pay for surviving. Maybe in time, they'll fade, replaced by the mundane rhythms of everyday life. But even as I write this, the memory is as vivid as if it happened last night. I can smell the pine needles and damp earth. I can feel the swirl of dust as the chanting built to a frenzy. I can hear the wind snuffing out the fire and see Marcus flying through the air from the creature's blow. My name is Ethan Price, and I am 32 years old. I don't believe in witches or curses, at least I didn't before. Now, I'm not sure what to believe. All I know is that something sinister lurks in the heart of Withlacoochee State Forest. something older and crueler than any man-made legend. It's out there in the darkness between the pines and the hush of a windless night, waiting for the next unfortunate travelers to stumble across its domain. And if you ever see footprints that don't quite look human or hear chanting you can't explain, turn back. Don't wait for sunrise, don't try to be brave, just leave, because once that thing sets its sights on you, there may be no escape. You might become just another name on a missing persons list, another story nobody wants to believe, but I believe because I lived it, and not all of us returned. My name is Sasha Holloway, I'm 28 years old, and this story happened in Florida's Tate's Hell State Forest. I had been longing for some time away from the noise of the city, so I loaded up my small RV and headed north from Tampa on a sultry morning. The plan was simple: drive to this famously mysterious forest near the Panhandle, find a quiet campsite, and spend a week reading, painting, and snapping a few nature photos I used to roll my eyes at campfire legends, thinking them cute bits of folklore. But now I know better. What I witnessed in Tate's Hell still makes me question where the line between life and death truly lies. I arrived late in the afternoon, driving the RV down an unpaved road that seemed more pothole than path. I'd read about Tate's Hell in an outdoors blog, mostly praising the place for its wild beauty. The blog mentioned the name's murky origin, some poor soul named Sebi. Tate got lost there long ago, cursed the swamp, and died. As I rattled along, Spanish moss drooped from twisted oak branches, and the air was thick with humidity. The cicadas thrummed, but in lulls between their buzz a hush seemed to fall that made me uneasy, though I couldn't say why. I finally found a pull-off spot near a narrow creek. It looked isolated enough, no other vehicles lined the dirt clearing, and I half smiled with relief at the solitude. Nature always restored me, especially after the stressful few weeks I'd had an ugly breakup, too many hours at a job that drained me, and the crush of city life wearing on my nerves. This felt like the reset button I so desperately needed. I parked the RV and hopped out, mud squelched under my boots. It smelled like decaying leaves and brackish water. After a little searching, I spotted a suitable spot to set up my canopy, a patch of relatively firm ground ringed by slender pine trees. For a while, I immersed myself in the easy tasks of arranging a folding chair, rummaging through my cooler for water, and checking my battery supply. I still had a couple of hours before sunset, so I decided to do a quick sweep of the area. If there was anything truly dangerous like alligators or wild boar, I wanted to know. As I headed out, I heard a scuff of footsteps behind me on the gravelly road. I spun around, startled, standing. There was an older man in worn jeans, a threadbare plaid shirt, and a faded cap. He had leathery skin, gray stubble, and a perpetual squint. He sized me up like I was a curiosity. Then he gave a little nod. "Evenin'," he said. He had a voice like a gravel road. "Name's Roy. You fixin' to stay out here?" I nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, just for a few days, hoping to paint and take in the scenery." Roy spat tobacco juice onto the ground, then shook his head slowly. "Mighty quiet spot for a woman alone. Tate's Hell ain't just a name, you know." He looked past me at the tall cypresses across the creek, their trunks mirrored in the dark water. "Folks come here and sometimes they don't come back." An uneasy ripple went through me, but I shrugged it off with a nervous laugh. "I've done a fair bit of solo camping, I'll be careful." He didn't smile back. "Just keep your wits about you. If you hear anything strange at night, best not follow it. Mind your camp after dark." He gave me a final searching look and turned away, trudging back along the path. I tried to brush it off. Locals like to scare newcomers with tall tales, or so I told myself. But as the sun sank, my mind replayed his warning. Over dinner, simple grilled veggies on my portable stove, I couldn't shake the odd tension in my gut. The frog calls and cricket chirps grew louder, with the fading light, and the cypresses across the creek became silhouettes in the purple dusk. I settled into my RV around 10, reading by lantern light. Just as I was drifting off, I heard a faint tapping sound on the outer wall. My heart kicked into gear. I froze, waiting to see if I heard it again. A minute passed in silence. Maybe it had been a branch brushing against the RV. Maybe an animal, nothing to lose sleep over. Yet my pulse wouldn't slow. It took me a long time to drift off after that. By morning, the memory of the tapping had faded to a dull worry. I busied myself making coffee, then decided to explore the area on foot. The day was muggy and hot. Insects buzzed around my ears as I walked along a narrow boardwalk trail, one that wove above a swampy patch. I nearly bumped into a tall woman in a park ranger uniform. She seemed surprised to see me. She had Isabel on her name tag and carried a small notebook, as if she'd been taking notes on local wildlife. I apologized for nearly knocking her over, and we struck up a conversation. She said her name was Isabel, and she was assigned to check different corners of Tate's, held to ensure none of the trails were blocked by fallen trees. When I mentioned I was camping off the main road, she raised her eyebrows. "You're braver than I am," she joked, though her eyes flickered with concern. "I usually tell visitors to stick to the designated campsites. More foot traffic, better cell reception if something happens." "I wanted some quiet," I said. "Trying to escape the city for a bit?" I hesitated, then asked, "Is it really dangerous out here? I ran into someone named Roy who seemed pretty insistent it's not safe." "Roy, I've heard about him," she replied. "He's lived around here forever. He might be overselling the danger, but let's just say we've had more than a few weird reports recently. People claiming to hear voices at night, see lights in the swamp, a few folks leaving abruptly without explanation." Her tone was casual, but I picked up on a hint of worry in her gaze. We parted ways soon after, promising to watch out for each other. As she walked off, she told me to find her if I needed anything. I felt a little less alone. The rest of the morning went by without incident. I even found a decent vantage point to try some watercolor sketches, gnarled trees twisting up from the murky water, a reflection that shimmered under a blazing sun. Painting calmed me, gave me a sense of purpose I'd been missing for months. But as the afternoon wore on, I took note of a second campsite maybe a few hundred yards from mine. A large pop-up tent was set up, along with a battered pickup parked nearby. Drawn by curiosity, I wandered over. That's how I met Marty, a fellow traveler who was leaning over a small camp grill, flipping burgers. He had a friendly, open face, sunburned cheeks, and a wide grin that put me at ease right away. He offered me a cup of coffee even, though it was sweltering outside. I accepted and we exchanged stories. Marty was on an extended road trip and hitting various state parks. "People around here say there's a ghost," he joked, gesturing to the swamp. "A kid's ghost, from some old pioneer family. But I figure it's just local lore." I forced a laugh and told him about Roy's warnings. Marty shook his head in mock disbelief. "Guess we better watch out for little ghost kids, right?" Despite my lingering unease, his optimistic banter cheered me up. We talked for a bit about our travels. Then I headed back to my own site, feeling comforted to know I wasn't the only camper out here. Sunset came quickly. The day's heat dissipated into a heavy hush and a thick fog began rolling in from the creek. I sat outside, enjoying a slight breeze and journaling about the day. Then I heard it, a faint sound that, at first, I took for an animal cry. But it repeated a high-pitched note that rose and fell in a pattern, eerily similar to a child's sob. My heart kicked in my chest. Could it be a lost kid? I almost went to investigate, but Roy's warning about following strange sounds nagged at me. I decided to stay put, listening intently. After a few minutes, the sobbing faded to silence. Trying to brush it off, I retreated into my RV for the night. That was my mistake, I think. If I'd investigated with a clear head while there was still light, maybe I would have found something I could comprehend. Instead, I lay awake in the quiet, the memory of those cries echoing in my mind. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. I woke with a start, sometime after midnight, to total darkness. My RV's interior lights were flickering. My battery, which had been recently charged, now read as nearly empty. Confused, I checked the generator. It seemed operational, yet for some reason it wasn't supplying power. Then the radio crackled to life on its own, a static hiss that made me jump. Over that static I could make out a voice, a child's voice if I wasn't hallucinating, softly calling, "Mommy, help me." My stomach twisted as I lunged to turn the radio off, only to find the switch was already in the off position. The voice continued for a few seconds, then dissolved into white noise. My hands shook as I yanked the wiring from the battery to silence it. I could feel cold sweat trickling down my back. This was no normal glitch. Something in the air felt charged, like the forest itself was pressing in. When morning finally arrived, I stepped outside with bleary eyes, anxious to see if Marty had experienced anything similar. I found his campsite easily but saw no sign of him. His tent was half collapsed, gear strewn around as though he'd left in a hurry or something had knocked everything over. I called his name, got nothing but the echo of my own voice. Then I noticed small footprints in the mud near his tent, too small to be an adult's, child-sized footprints, leading away into the deeper part of the forest. A chill spread through me. My rational mind tried to concoct an explanation. Maybe a local Family S kid was wandering around. But how did that tie in with Marty vanishing? I tried telling myself maybe he went for an early hike, but the scattered mess of his camp looked more like a struggle or a hasty retreat. My voice trembled as I yelled his name again. No answer. In my growing panic, I went looking for Park Ranger Isabel. Instead, I found Old Man Roy walking a narrow path just off the main road. He eyed me with that same guarded expression. Seems you've seen what's out here," he said quietly, as if reading my face. "You come across footprints?" "Yes," I replied, heart thudding. "There's a child. Marty is missing. I think it might be serious." Roy's gaze flicked to the surrounding trees. "Ain't no living child in this swamp, if that's what you're asking. It's the lost soul pioneer family from way back. Folks say the daughter vanished one day. She's out here searching for her mama or for anyone who'll follow." He stepped closer, voice low. "You'd best leave while you can. This forest has ways of keeping those who wander too far." I wanted to argue, to say that was ridiculous, but the words caught in my throat. My mind reeled, and a deeper part of me recognized a kernel of truth in what he was saying. Something here wasn't right. I sped off in the RV, trying to see if maybe I could pick up cell reception, but the engine sputtered after half a mile. My battery gauge was back to near dead, and the electrical system kept flickering. Fury and fear roiled inside me. I slammed the steering wheel, tears stinging my eyes. Was the forest itself sabotaging my vehicle? It felt too insane to be real, yet here I was. I parked near a sandy patch under some pines, deciding to search for Isabel on foot. I found her near a small wooden boardwalk that led to a scenic overlook. She listened with growing concern as I described Marty's disappearance, the footprints, and the haunting radio voice. I don't know how to report this," she admitted, looking pale. "But we need to find him. Let's start combing the nearby trails." We set off, the midday heat like a damp blanket on our shoulders. For almost an hour, we scoured side paths, called Marty's name, listened for any sign of him. The swamp offered no answers. Occasionally, I spotted faint footprints that might have been his, but they led nowhere, dissolving into murky water. I also saw what looked like a single child's footprint pressed into the mud, spaced oddly as if leading deeper into the cypress grove. Every hair on my neck prickled. Isabel, usually poised, wore a tight-lipped expression that told me she was spooked too. At one point, the swamp opened up into a clearing. To our left stood a small historical marker. It was battered and rusted, barely legible. I knelt to read it, discovering a piece of local history about a pioneer homestead that had once stood in this part of Tate's Hell. The family's last name was Whitman. The text ended abruptly, but there was a mention of a child who disappeared. Her name mostly faded, just an initial, a visible. Something about that marker and the oppressive quiet around it made my stomach lurch. We had no luck finding Marty. So, Isabel led me back to her small ranger station, a rickety cabin-like structure near the edge of the forest. She rummaged through a stack of old documents, local lore, newspaper clippings. Most of it was about wildlife sightings, but we found a few references to ghost stories. Hikers claiming to see the silhouette of a little girl, hearing her cries at twilight, or glimpsing childlike footprints that ended in the middle of a bog. The stories concluded that the child's spirit tried to lure people off the path, presumably to drown them or trap them in the muck. I felt physically ill. Still, I couldn't just abandon Marty to that fate, if he was still alive. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Isabel and I drove back to my campsite in her official truck. My RV refused to start again. She insisted on checking my battery connections, but found no obvious fault. While she tinkered, I restlessly paced the clearing. A thickening fog slithered in once more, as if drawn by the coming dark. That night was worse than any nightmare. Sitting in Isabel's truck for safety, we heard a chilling laughter that seemed to drift in the humid air around us. Then it morphed into sobs that grew louder and louder, until it sounded as if a desperate child stood right outside the passenger door. I mustered my courage and flung the door open, shining a flashlight into the swirling fog. For a split second, I saw a small figure, long hair, old-fashioned dress, bare feet. Then it vanished, and I realized I'd left the truck in my panic. Isabel shouted at me to stay close, but the figure reappeared between the cypress trunks, beckoning, face half obscured by shadows. My heart hammered as I took a step forward, feeling an inexplicable pull as though the child needed my help. Isabel yanked me back. "Don't," she hissed. "We can't just go chasing after some phantom." She was right, and we both knew it. The lure was strong, though. My eyes stung with the urge to follow, almost as if maternal instinct or pity was driving me. The sobs dwindled away, leaving an echo in my mind that lingered for hours. Neither of us slept. Morning brought us grim determination. Isabel said we should find old man Roy. He seemed to know more about this place than he cared to admit. We cruised the rough roads until we spotted him perched on a fallen log, whittling a piece of driftwood. The old man glared at us, as though expecting trouble. Isabel demanded straight answers. "We have a missing camper. We've seen the child. What do we do?" Roy's leathery face twitched. With a sigh, he began to speak in a low monotone, telling us the story. Generations ago, a pioneer family built a homestead in these swamps. The mother died giving birth to their second child, a girl. The father tried raising his children alone in this harsh land. One day, the girl vanished near the water's edge, never found. Some say the father went mad searching for her, cursing the forest. Others claim her spirit is still here, searching for her mother. They believe that once the child's ghost marks you through footprints, voices, or illusions, she won't let go. Many vanish, presumably lured into deadly bogs or sinkholes. Roy spat again, his eyes fixed on the distance. Only way to break that hold is to help the child find rest. Locals talk about a release ritual, done at the old homestead site, but nobody's tried it in decades. Isabel and I exchanged looks. We'd do anything to save Marty if he was still around and to free ourselves from this threat. Roy grudgingly outlined what he knew. We'd need some personal token of family love to show the child compassion. We'd need water blessed by a preacher or a pure source. And we'd have to burn a piece of wood from the original homestead, offering a final farewell. It sounded insane. Yet everything about the last 48 hours felt insane already. I returned to my RV to gather a precious keepsake, a small locket that belonged to my late grandmother. It was the only item I had that felt like genuine maternal love. Isabel said she had a small bottle of holy water her grandmother had given her long ago. And Roy claimed he still had a chunk of wood he'd salvaged years back from the decaying homestead foundation. He muttered something about it being cursed, but that it might serve as our best shot. Time was short, and the sense of dread weighed on us. We guessed that if Marty was alive, the child's ghost had trapped him somehow. We had no illusions about the danger. We set off on foot, Roy leading with his limp and cane, Isabel carrying the bottle of holy water, and me clutching the locket. The path took us deeper into the swamp than I'd ever been. Gnarled roots jutted from the mud. The odor of stagnant water was strong, and the canopy overhead shut out much of the daylight, creating a twilight gloom. A few times, I thought I saw a flicker of movement between the cypress trunks and I heard labored breathing, but it didn't belong to any of us. Finally, we reached a clearing. Half-rotted logs jutted from the ground in a rectangle, the skeletal remains of a small cabin. Rusted nails poked out at odd angles, and the earth around it sagged in places, forming hidden sinkholes. The air was cold despite the Florida heat. My breath caught in my throat. This had to be the old homestead. I could almost feel the sorrow imprinted in the soil. Roy told us to place the charred wood chunk in the center of the old foundation and pour the holy water on it. I set the locket beside it, the metal glinting in the gray light. Isabel took out her lighter, but her hand trembled so badly she almost dropped it. Before we could begin, we heard a weak voice cry out from behind a collapsed wall. "Help!" My eyes widened, and Isabel rushed forward. Behind the rubble lay Marty, alive but disheveled, his eyes wild. He clutched his arm as if in pain, blinking at us like he couldn't believe we were real. He stammered about following a child's voice that led him deeper and deeper until he couldn't find his way out. He must have fallen or been dragged here. He wasn't sure. We helped him stand, half supporting his weight. Suddenly, the air crackled with energy. A pressure built around my ears, and I heard a child's sob, so close it might have been right beside me. Roy shouted to us to hurry. He placed the wood chunk on a flat rock and Isabel poured her grandmother's holy water over it. I laid my locket gently on top. I wasn't sure what to say, so I spoke from my heart. I told the child's spirit we understood her pain, that we brought a piece of motherly love and a hope that she might find peace. Then Isabel flicked the lighter. A small flame sparked, the wood sputtered as though resisting, then caught fire in an instant. Smoke rose, swirling in the damp air. The child's apparition appeared at the edge of the clearing. She looked more solid than before. Sad eyes, a dirt-stained old dress, bare feet. Her face flickered, half hidden by ghostly haze. Slowly, she stepped forward. My spine went rigid. The flame leapt higher, crackling with intensity. The child's eyes met mine, and I felt an overwhelming wave of sorrow and longing that nearly buckled my knees. She reached out, mouth opening as if to speak, but only a strangled whimper came. I thought I heard her whisper, "Mama." Tears blurred my vision. Her expression twisted with heartbreak, then flickered to anger. The ground around us trembled, water seeping up to the surface. Isabel stumbled, nearly losing her footing. Marty clutched my shoulder, trembling. Roy shouted out, words I didn't recognize, a plea or a prayer. The child gave a wail that echoed through the pines, setting the birds into a frenzy. The smoke curled around her, and for a moment she looked as though she was dissolving. Then the entire clearing erupted in chaotic wind. My hair whipped across my face. I saw the child's silhouette distort, stretching taller, as though the spirit was torn between staying and leaving. Something slammed into Roy, sending him reeling.
Isabel reached for his arm, but the ground opened in a small sinkhole that nearly swallowed them both. With one desperate motion, I grabbed the locket from the flame and held it toward the child, repeating, "It's all right. You can go home."
"You're not alone." A piercing shriek tore the air, and the child's form shattered into a swirl of gray mist. The wind died abruptly, leaving the smell of burnt wood and damp moss in its wake. The flames sputtered out as if an unseen hand had snuffed them. My ears rang in the sudden silence. The sense of pressure and despair receded, leaving me weak in the knees. When I looked around, Roy was panting on his back, Isabel kneeling beside him, eyes wide. Marty stared in disbelief, as though he'd witnessed the most terrifying miracle imaginable. The clearing felt different, less oppressive, as if a weight had lifted. I heard no sobbing, no laughter, nothing but our own ragged breathing. We hobbled out of that place, half carrying Marty, who was dehydrated and clearly traumatized. Roy wouldn't speak a word about what we had just done, only gave me a nod that might have been gratitude or relief. Once we reached more solid ground, Isabel and I helped Marty into the ranger's truck. I insisted on checking on Roy, but he shook me off, still breathing heavily. "Not the first time I've seen some of this," he muttered, "but I damn sure hope it's the last." Then, as quickly as he'd come into our lives, he turned and hobbled away, disappearing between the tall pines. Isabel drove us back to civilization, Marty half conscious with exhaustion. By the time we neared the highway, the sky was a radiant blue, the midday sun glaring down on the cypress swamps. It was hard to believe just hours earlier we'd witnessed something beyond rational explanation. Isabel took Marty to a nearby hospital, and I eventually returned to my RV. Miraculously, it started right up as though no battery issue had ever existed. Perhaps whatever force held me there had been lifted. In the days that followed, Marty recovered. I visited him once before. He continued his travels, but he looked haunted, as if part of him would always be stuck in those dim piney woods. Isabel filed a vague report, omitting the supernatural details but noting that a missing camper was found near the old homestead ruins. I wondered if anyone would connect the dots or if they'd simply chalk it up to the unpredictability of the swamp. As for me, I left Tate's Hell with a mixture of relief and a lingering sadness. The locket was charred and warped, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Whenever I touch its blackened surface, I remember the child's face, her tearful eyes. I like to think we set her free, that she's at peace somewhere beyond that dark forest, but I can't be certain. Sometimes I dream about that final wail, the swirl of mist, and I awake wondering if a piece of her remains in those silent bogs, still searching for a mother she never knew. When people ask me about Tate's Hell, I usually say it's beautiful in its wildness, cautioning them to respect the land and never wander at night. Some nod politely, some laugh it off. I see my own past skepticism in their eyes. I can't really blame them. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I'd never believe it. The name Tate's Hell doesn't feel like an exaggeration anymore. It's not that the forest is evil. It's that the sorrow of those lost there can linger, turning the swamp itself into a labyrinth of restless spirits. My final memory of that place is driving away on a dirt road, glimpsing the reflection of tall cypresses in the black water, and sensing a small shape in the corner of my eye, like a child watching from the shadows. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Maybe she was gone. Maybe I just imagined it, but I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, whispered a quiet goodbye, and focused on the open road ahead. Even now, as I recount these events, I feel that subtle tension in my muscles, that chill along my spine. Part of me remains tethered to that encounter, my belief in normal reality shaken forever. It's not so easy to rejoin a world of traffic jams and grocery store lines after you've stood on the brink of the unknown, after you've touched a ghost's sorrow and survived. I'm trying to move on, to let my life return to some semblance of normal, but I often wonder if the forest truly let go of me or if it's just biding its time, waiting for me to come back. I catch myself flipping through the pictures I took, scanning them for any stray glimpse of a small figure lurking in the background. Occasionally, I swear I see something, a blur, a shape, but that could be my nerves playing tricks. Regardless, I'll never forget the sound of her voice on that crackling radio or the sight of her footprints outside Marty's tent. Tate's Hell keeps its secrets, and I suppose I'm just another traveler who brushed against them and came away changed. Some nights, half asleep, I hear faint sobbing in my dreams. The child's face appears, eyes brimming with tears, and for a moment, I'm back in that clearing, holding a charred locket in a swirl of smoke. Then I wake up in my bed, the city noises humming outside, and realize it's just me alone in the dark, safe yet still haunted. Part of me hopes the crying I hear is only in my mind. Another part whispers that perhaps she's still calling from across some boundary we barely understand, yearning for comfort that can never come. And so I lie there, reminding myself I did all I could, that we tried to give her the release she deserved. Yet even with that reassurance, the memory of her final scream lingers, a ghost in my thoughts, a testament to how close we can come to the things we never wanted to believe. I'm 28 years old, and I'll never see the world the same way again. That is the price I paid for encountering something truly beyond explanation in Florida's Tate's Hell State Forest. If anyone reads this and doubts me, that's fine. I wouldn't have believed it either. But if you do go there, and you hear a child crying by the water's edge, do not follow. Some roads lead only deeper into the shadows, where lost spirits wander and the living can become lost themselves. I escaped, but many have not. And in a place named Tate's Hell, it's best not to tempt fate.